Hey everybody, Mr. W here. Today's lesson is on dividing decimal numbers. Decimal numbers are numbers that have a decimal point. For example, 4 and 40 hundredths has a decimal point. We're dividing by whole number divisors, meaning that in this case the 7 does not have a decimal point. And hundredths is a reference to the place value that we will be working to today, the hundredths place value. We're only going to be doing two problems today, but they're two different types of problems that require slightly different strategies. The first type of problem is where we need to mainly just remember to not forget the decimal point. The second type of problem will involve an extra step where we will need to add a 0 to make an equivalent decimal to finish the problem. And we will get to that one in just a moment. Okay, so our first problem is 4 and 29 hundredths divided by 3. And this one, we want to focus on our first main idea of just don't forget the decimal point. When you have a dividend that has a decimal point, just make sure that your quotient, or in other words, your answer, also has a decimal point and that decimal point is lined up. All right, so directions: divide the number to the hundredths place value. When you do decimals, you can sometimes work to the tenths, hundredths, and even thousands or more. For this problem, we're only going to work to the hundredths place value. I'm going to put our answer up there of 1 and 43 hundredths in the gray, but we'll work to see how did we come up with that answer. A good idea is to not forget your decimal point and go ahead and put that up there above, in between the ones and the tenths, just to get started there. Okay. I'll put the steps in the bottom corner. So the first step is to divide, and we'll start with the 4 on the left and ask yourself, how many times does 3 go into 4 without going over? So if we look at our 3 facts on the right, that would be 3 times 1 equals 3, which is our multiplication step, right? The 3 times 1, the 1 goes at the top in the ones place value, and the answer of 3 goes on the bottom. Next, we subtract to find the difference. 4 minus 3 is 1. And now we're ready to bring down that 2 in the tenths place value. That gives us 1 and 2 tenths when you put in your decimal point, and we're ready to begin again. We're going to start with the 3. In other words, how many times does 3 go into 1 and 2 tenths without going over? Looking at our facts, that would be 3 times 4 equals 12. The 3 times 4, the 4 goes at the top in the tenths place value, and the answer of 12 goes at the bottom, but we add the decimal point because we're dealing with the numbers with decimals today. Going to subtract to find the difference, and we get 0. Now we're ready to bring down the 9 from the hundredths place value. And now we have 9 hundredths. Let's start with the divide step again. How many times can 3 go into 9 hundredths without going over? On our facts there, that would be 3 times 3, if we can get that up there, equals 9. The 3 times 3, the 3 goes in the hundredths place at the top, and the answer of 9 goes on the bottom, but we convert that to 900 since we're dealing with decimals today. When we subtract, we get 0 remainders. So our answer is 1 and 43 hundredths. Our second type of problem, the main idea, is that we can add zeros to the decimal numbers to make equivalent decimal numbers. Good place to start is let's look at whole numbers first. If you have 4 apples, you cannot add zeros to that 4 to a whole number and get an equivalent number. In other words, I can't take the 4 and say I'm going to add 0 and have it be equal, because 40 apples is a lot more than 4. So you cannot do that with whole numbers because they are not the same size. However, you can do that with decimals. You can add zeros to decimal numbers and get equivalent numbers. remember your decimal point, anything to the right side is a decimal number. So in this case, the 4/10. We can take that number and the 4/10 part, we can add a 0 to the right, and that is equal. It is equivalent. The reason why is that 4/10 and 40/100ths are equal in size, and therefore they are equivalent. So, in review, you can add zeros to decimal numbers and get equivalent numbers. Okay, with that in mind, let's look at our last problem. Notice our place values, because again, when we're adding zeros, it just shows you that the anything to the right of the decimal point is a decimal, and we can add a 0 there when needed for later on. Our answer today is going to be 62 hundredths for this problem, and we're going to the hundredths place value. Let's put in our decimal point there at the top, and we'll get started. Starting with the 4, how many times can 7 go into 4 without going over? Looking at our 7 facts, that would be 0 times, and that goes at the top. And now we're going to move over to the next place value and ask yourself again, how many times can 7 go into 4 and 4/10 without going over? Looking at our facts, that would be the fact 7 times 6 is 42. 7 times 6, the 6 goes at the top in the 10th place value, and the 42 goes on the bottom, but we add our decimal point, and now we're ready to subtract to find the difference. The 4/10 minus 2/10 would equal 2/10, and now we are ready to bring down the next number because we're working to hundredths, but notice there is no number, so we're going to add a 0 to make an equivalent decimal. Remember, we said that we're okay to do that only for decimals, okay, not for whole numbers. And with that 0, we're going to bring it down, and now we have 20 hundredths, and now we're ready to divide. Ask yourself, how many times can 7 go into 20 hundredths without going over? Well, that would be the fact 7 times 2 is 14. The 7 times 2, the 2 goes in the hundredths at the top. The answer of 14 goes on the bottom to subtract. 20 hundredths minus 14 hundredths is 6 hundredths. Now, with our 6 hundredths, the question is, is that a remainder? Do we keep going? In this case, for this problem, the answer is no. We don't go any further because the directions said we're only working to the hundredths place value. So we have the answer of 62 hundredths. If you made it this far, thank you very much. Keep practicing your division and your decimal skills, and we hope to see you on the next one.